So hey, here's one with a funny backstory. Not so much the movie. The backstory of the movie is some people wanted to make a movie, and they did. So I'm not sure there's anything particularly funny about the production in this case. It seems to have been accomplished to about the extent they wanted it to be. But in this case, why it ended up on our show here is kind of another story. You see, over on the other series where I review new movies, I thought it might be a funny joke to pretend to review Brett Ratner's fascist propaganda documentary about the US dictator's wife, and then actually sort of act like I was reviewing this 1989 Swedish animated movie that most of the world had never really heard of, or at least hadn't heard of recently, with a similar sounding title, but that I kind of remembered seeing rebroadcast on probably Nickelodeon or Disney Channel back in the 90s, and yeah, haha, I made a funny. Anyway, as I should have guessed might happen, a surprisingly number of people said they actually would have preferred I just kept going and talked more about this movie instead, and yeah, you know what, fair, okay, I should do that. And I would have done it right away, but as a small hitch, I wanted to try and get my hands on either a copy that had actual subtitles on the print instead of relying on dodgy, digitally generated captions or my own extremely limited grasp of the Swedish language, or failing that, an English dubbed version, which does exist and was produced for Australian television broadcasts and released on VHS at one point, because that's the version I'd originally seen to know that it existed in the first place. Not because that's preferable somehow, but because I want to be able to at least show a few scenes with dialogue so people can get a sense of the story and what's sometimes a pretty talky cartoon. Not exactly a surprise, since it's a loose Shakespeare riff, and subbing it myself would be kind of a pain in the ass, and I'll probably make mistakes doing it, but actually securing a copy like that wasn't something I could do in a timely fashion, and that Australian English dub version actually seems to be lost media, maybe? Like, the VHSs actually didn't seem to have made it out of the PAL region, or if they are, they're very expensive collectors, so maybe there would be an updated version of this in the future, but in the interest of doing this in a timely fashion, I guess I'm gonna do the best with what I have. There might be some translation errors if I do put some subs on any of this, but yeah, apologies on that to anyone out there who actually speaks Swedish. Here we go. So, Resan till Melania is generally known, if at all outside of Sweden, as being a version of William Shakespeare's The Tempest, which, if you know your Shakespeare, was one of the magical fantasy plays. So there's lots of characters, misunderstandings, and a misdirection-driven storyline, play within a play business, and problematic folklore racism, or maybe not, depending on which professor you ask. Nominally, The Tempest is about royal folks who get marooned by a storm on an island ruled by a wizard named Prospero, who's exiled there with his daughter and a dude named Caliban, who's some kind of island creature. He, might be a fish man, but he may also just be a native, so yeah. Also, Prospero is actually a deposed duke, and these marooned people are the folks that exiled him, and he's using weather magic to do a revenge scheme, and there's double crosses, and he also kind of forgets what his plan is at one point. Look, not even Shakespeare hit the center mass on every shot, okay? Some people call this one of the lesser plays, some people call it one of the better ones. This is not a show about theater scholarship.
Oh, children having sex, 2 murders, double suicide. Very irresponsible to teach this in schools.
Anyway, calling Melonia just an adaptation of it is kind of doing a disservice in both directions, since it's more like a meta retake where adapting The Tempest is actually part of the literal narrative, and the broader plot is more on the lines of an eco-socialist fable that parallels the play's characters and initial setup, while also actively critiquing some of its themes and characterizations, specifically that of Caliban's enslavement and the monarchist society that Shakespeare's era simply took for granted.
Bord fanns skurkar som i girighet har smitt planer att plundra också denna ö. Den sista fagra ö som finns i hela världen.
Och nu har du trollat bort dem.
Jag har stoppat deras illdåd.
Ja, men pappa, jag tycker i alla fall synd om de små sjömännen.
Slit och släp dagen lång.
The film was primarily the vision of Swedish animation legend Per Ahlin, best known for the classic holiday feature The Tale of karl-bertil Jonsson's Christmas Eve and Dunderklumpen, at a budget of 22 million krona, and was the highest budgeted Swedish animated movie project ever undertaken at the time, making use of intricately animated foreground cells, some very elaborate looking rotoscope and optical effects, and hand-painted backgrounds, all so detailed that it's not at all surprising that it began production in 1982 and took 7 years of work to complete. And the result is really rather lovely looking, even in parts that are trying pretty hard to not look particularly pretty. Yeah, like I said, I'm not summing all of it. So our basic setup here is that there's these two island nations, or islands, one of which is pretty dull just being an island, and the other which is very into being a nation, and is therefore evil because this is a European cartoon from the late 80s, and these, or rather people whose well-intentioned hippie parents made sure they actually saw these, is where jokes like this came from.
Here's Eastern Europe's favorite cat and mouse team, Worker and Parasite. What the hell was that?
So the evil capitalism island where they do machines and pollution and child slavery is called Plutonia, and it's ruled by Slug and Slag, and they're running out of resources because instead of making food and happiness, Slug and Slag just want to make weapons and war and profit because that's the future, and look, symbolism, okay? And in order to replenish their resources, Plutonia wants to invade and conquer the other island, Melonia,
thereby destroying planet Druidia and saving planet Spaceball. Everybody got that?
which has bountiful food and water and veggies and fruits and especially melons, hence the name, but that's easier said than done because it's supposedly protected by magic, conjured by the wizard Prospero. Meanwhile, Melonia is doing just fine, because it has no machines or pollution and thus no problems, but that's kinda because there's no one there except Prospero, who draws his magic from those same island resources, and he's just a wizard in this version, not an exiled guy, and he doesn't really have a revenge plan, he just kinda wants to chill on the island. Prospero's daughter, a dog named William who likes to do plays, and yeah, that's it going about where you think, a magic albatross, and Caliban, who in this version is a vegetable person who does all the actual gardening work on the island, and he's actually kinda pissed about that, honestly, be doing the work part.
Slit och släp. Vem är du? Slav. Slav. Det är vad du är. Prosperos slav.
And this is what makes Voyage to Melonia interesting, because all kidding about the bluntness of its allegories aside,
Message!
it's actually trying to do something a little more nuanced than Industrial Island versus Utopia Nature Island by actually pointing out that Melonia only really has its paradise because it's an isolationist monarchy, and even though Prospero has magic to keep him and his daughter and handful of friends comfortable, they still have basically a literal slave making sure the grass gets cut and the food keeps growing. And, you know, all of the innocent people in Plutonia who aren't Slug and Slag are starving regardless of how safe Melonia is. Yeah, you know what? This ain't actually a great state of leadership on either end, is it? Did I mention the last shitty decade of Cold War was still dragging out during the whole 6 years they were making this in the real world, and it was still 3 years from ending when it came out?
Reagan smash! Reagan smash!
So, yeah, in the actual plot, the realization of all that pretty much drives things. A kid from Plutonia named Ferdinand escapes and washes up on Melonia, and when he comes to, he's all, so, hey, thanks for the rescue, but, like, all my other impoverished proletariat back home could use this hookup too, and it looks like you all got, like, plenty of space here in magical rainbow happy land jungle, so let's go do some refugee rescue shit.
Ja, här är allt så fint. Men jag tänker på mina kamrater. De finns kvar på en otäcka ö. Vi kanske kan hjälpa dem. Du.
Mästare, blås på! Jag flyger före!
But also, Slug and Slag have recognized that Caliban isn't happy with his station, and they're thinking, discontent among the labor class, that sounds exploitable. So they capture Caliban and try to turn his general unhappiness to their advantage, since he's already accidentally consumed a potion that Prospero was going to use to power up his magical influence over Melonia, and now he's become a super strong giant. He should use his new strength to help them conquer Melonia, strip its resources, and become part of the ruling class in Plutonia. But as it turns out, Caliban might be simple, but he's not stupid. He has his own take on things, and what to do with power now that he has it.
Vi har många bomber.
Vi ska behärska världen.
Jag kommer från Melonia.
Ja, just min vän. Melonia. Vi har planer och du ska hjälpa oss.
Men alla era bomber?
Utan bomber, ingen framtid. Man måste ha planer. Melonia ska bli vårt. Där finns krafter.
Där finns meloner och citroner.
Där finns krafter.
Där flyger fåglar och surrar bil.
Där finns krafter.
Där forsar vattnet klart och himlen är blå.
Det kan vi ändra på. Med den stora borren ska vi hitta den stora kraften.
Ingen ska härska över Melonia.
Trollkarlen Prospero då?
Prospero! Varken hans trollerier eller era bomber ska tämja mig.
Elsewhere in the story, the other heroes do manage to rescue Ferdinand's friends and also find an abandoned Plutonian theater and a copy of Shakespeare's The Tempest, wherein William tries to restage the play, recognizing its similarity to their own lives to entertain everyone, which eventually dovetails into a reunion with Caliban after he defeats the villains, and his declaration that since A, Slug, Slag, and Plutonia itself are defeated, B, Prospero's magic make me even more powerful potion is gone, and C, he, Caliban, is now too big to be anybody's slave, the world order on Melonia is gonna be a little different from now on.
Elixir! Kraftsoppa!
Ditt? Den kraften, den har du tagit från Melonia. Bovarna som rövade bort mig, de var också ute efter den. Men över Melonia ska ingen härska.
Nej, du har rätt.
And yeah, that's our big ending. No one shall rule Melonia. No war machines, but also no wizardry. No more kings, no more slaves. Caliban says power to the people, and Prospero agrees. In the end, it wasn't actually his magic that freed them or won the day nearly as much as it was the good folk from both islands working together that saved the day, brought down the villains, and brought everyone to a new and better home. I mean, okay, one of those things was specifically the vegetable kaiju man, but still, it's a sincere message, well carried, and you can see why Ahlin and his collaborators were committed enough to spend over half a decade bringing this to realization.
Ingen ska härska. Allas kraft skall ersätta min trolldomssaft. Och Caliban blir fri, fri, fri.
Voyage to Melonia is the definition of the slow burn, visually relaxing, mildly preachy, but in the good way, comfort watch family animation that its edge of the medium is still known for, and while everything that makes it unique and memorable is also everything that makes socially conscious Swedish animation a subgenre that never exactly broke huge for global cartooning the way that giant fighting robots from Japan did. But if you've never seen anything like this and it seems like it'd pick your fancy, it's definitely worth a look. It absolutely delivers a vibe you won't get from anything else, and yeah, now you know that Voyage to Melonia is a movie that exists.